千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Now, let's get back into chapter 34 and pick up on our discussion where we left off. So previously, we did the sectional analysis. We were able to divide it up into 3 sections, and they pivot around these lines that repeat themselves. As you can see, the last 4 characters of line 5 and the last 4 characters of line 8, they provide the same characters, which are translated in a similar way, does not rule over them. And it turns out those are pretty good divisions for the introductory part, section 1, the middle part, the contents, and the conclusion, the 3rd part. Now, of course, we could also have a subdivision for line 1 and 2 by themselves, and then 3 and 4. But we decided to go with a more simplistic approach, although as with so many other chapters, it is important for us to stick to the meaning, to understand the meaning clearly in this chapter of Dao De Jing. And that is why we went to do an additional layer of analysis. As you can see here, to single out a key character from 34. 34 begins with this character, Da, which means big or vast or great. And then toward the end of the chapter, and certainly the last character of the last line is the same character. And that's because the overarching theme in this particular chapter is all about greatness. The greatness of the Tao is explained in multiple layers, multiple ways. This particular chapter talks about why the Tao is great, but then also provides clear indications on how the sages would emulate the greatness of the Tao in order to be great, to become great sages. And Tao cultivators will emulate the sages in nature and the Tao to be great in Tao cultivation. And your task and mine, our jobs is to follow that same methodology to understand the greatness of the Tao, and then emulate from that, look to nature and the sages and advanced Tao cultivators for our cue as to what we can do to attain that greatness. This particular chapter has quite a few indications, specific ideas and points on how to be great. So last time we summarized everything, we built up 2 slides and provided 7 points on greatness. So today, what I wanted to do was to take a look back in the chapter from line 1 down to 11. Previously, we were able to get to the very end in our line-by-line discussion, in our very detailed discussion of the meaning. Then I wanted to go back and take a look to see if there are any important concepts that we didn't cover. Because as you know, as with so many other chapters of the Dao De Jing, this particular one lends itself to multiple layers of understanding. So I want to make sure that we exhaustively talk about the different layers so we come away with a very clear understanding of what this is all about. Let me explain what I mean by that. In the very beginning, in line 1, we have this line called the Great Dao is like a flood. Now, what we talked about last time, you will see in the blue bullets below. Number one, in real life, water may be present in a small quantity. So for instance, if you have a cup holding water, that's a very small quantity. Now, that water by itself has characteristics of the Tao, but it's not a great metaphor for the Tao itself because the Tao is everywhere, or what I say here is all pervasive. So it's more like water flooding everywhere. That's why flood water is being used to represent the Tao. Secondly, what we know is that floodwaters seep into everything. They go everywhere. They don't just, they're not just present everywhere, they move around, they get into everything. So in a similar way, the Tao doesn't just surround everything, it is also in everything. So this is the reason why the first point out of the 7 that we talked about last time was to emulate the Tao like the floodwater and be unstoppable. Just like you can't stop floodwater from coming into the house when it's flooding severely. You can block one place while the water will find another place to gain entrance into the house. Water goes everywhere. It is unstoppable. So number 1 in the blueprints from last time was to emulate the Tao and be unstoppable yourself. Now, having said that, having gone through that and made that point, I went back and realized that there really needs to be more said about this whole idea of the Tao being everywhere. That's because there are multiple layers of meaning embedded within. And once you delve deeper, you realize that there are quite a few life-changing concepts embedded in that one simple statement, the Great Dao is like a flood, leading to the realization that the Great Dao is everywhere. So I want to talk about this aspect of it. The best way that we can talk about it is by using a story. So there's a perfect story written by Zhuangzi that talks about this exactly. So I want to take a moment to present that to you. It is a story that hasn't been published yet, so I would like to tell you that story, share that story with you, and then discuss its meaning with you. The name of the story, as you can see in this slide, is Where is the Tao? One of the well-known stories from Zhuangzi. So and a quick note about Zhuangzi down here, zi, the TZU that you see here, that is Chinese for master. Zhuang, the surname of the master. So this is Master Zhuang, basically. Now, CHUAN is the previous system, the older system of romanization, which was Wade Giles. It depicted Zhuang using CH with a notation that it is supposed to sound like Zhuang. Now, this has led to a lot of confusion, so people pronounce it like Chuang with a CH sound. In order to clarify, the newer, more updated romanization system, pinyin, will use Z instead of C in front of it. So that will cause a native speaker of English to sound it out more correctly, Zhuang. Either way it's written, it's supposed to sound the same, and it's supposed to sound more like the pinyin spelling with a Z, Zhuang. So that's just a quick note about the name of this particular master. The interesting thing about Zhuangzi is that he taught using stories, and the stories that he wrote were often extremely profound. And I even sometimes caution people against going into a story too deeply because they contain life-changing thoughts that if you begin to contemplate what those thoughts mean to you, you may actually change your mind about certain things. And that process can be controversial, it can be uncomfortable. Nevertheless, in studying the Tao, I find that it's the greatest value. I want to study the Tao in order to look at life differently, in order to look at everything more clearly. Zhuangzi does that. So, without further ado, let me share the story with you about where is the Tao. In this particular story, as with many Zhuangzi stories, it's a conversation between Zhuangzi and someone else. In this particular case, this someone else is a scholar who was taking a stroll outside with Zhuangzi, and they are discussing philosophy. They are discussing life. They're talking about the meaning of it all. So as they are chatting, walking, the scholar asked Zhuangzi, so we're talking about this Tao, this great Tao that you keep referring to. Tell me, Master Zhuang, where is it? Where is the Tao? Now, because two of them were outside, Zhuangzi is able to gesture all around to say back to the scholar. He said, well, the Tao is everywhere. And he added, there's no place where the Tao is not. No matter which way you look, there is the Tao. Now, this was not something that the scholars was familiar with. He didn't really get the concept. He didn't quite understand. So he said, well, can you be a little more specific? This is really vague. Can you point it out? Can you point it out to me? Where is the Tao? So Zhuangzi looked around and saw ants crawling underfoot. So he pointed to the ants on the ground. He pointed them out to the scholar. He said, well, look at the ants. The Tao is among these ants. Now, he picked that specifically for a specific reason, but this was really surprising to the scholar. What? Ants? Because you got to understand, throughout all this time, the scholar is thinking about the Tao more like a deity, which should be holy, which should be special, which should be reserved for a special place. Now we're pointing at these insects crawling on the ground, which it can hardly be more lowly than that. So he said he was so surprised. He turned to Zhuangzi and said, well, why so lowly? Why is the Tao in such a lowly place, on the ground, among the insects? That doesn't make any sense. Next, Zhuangzi is now driving toward a particular point. So he gestures, he points to the grass that they've been walking among, and he said, the Tao is in the weeds. This was even more surprising to the scholar because, well, the ants, being insects, they have the power of mobility. So in his mind, the insects are at a higher level than the plants. The plants, including the weeds, the grass, is at a lower level than any insects that could move around because plants couldn't move. So out of that surprise, he asked, but wait a minute, hold on one second. The weeds are even more lowly than the ants. Why is the Tao even more lowly than the ants, than the insects? So Zhuangzi wasn't done with him. Zhuangzi pointed to some construction material that had been discarded. We were just sitting around someplace, just a bunch of clay tiles. So he pointed to the clay tiles. He said, see the clay tiles? The Dow is there. The Dow is within the clay tiles. Now, in the mind of the scholar, this was even lower than the plants or the weeds or the grass. The reason is because at least you could say that the ants are alive, the plants are alive, the grass is alive, it grows, it'll grow. So it's a living thing. But when you point to the clay tiles, well, it's a dead thing. It's just a piece of clay shaped like a tile. That's it. So displeased, he turned back to Zhuangzi. He said, well, hey, wait, stop. Why do you keep going lower and lower? The ants and weeds are alive. The clay tile is dead. It's just a thing. So Zhuangzi wasn't done with him, and Zhuangzi pointed to a pile of manure because you're walking outside. There are occasionally manure left by animals wandering outside. So he said, the Tao is in urine and defecation, like this pile. So by now, the scholar's surprise turned to anger and frustration. He refused to engage further. He felt that he was being made fun of perhaps insulted. So he said nothing further. And that is the end of our story. Where is the Tao? So what you have heard is that Zhuangzi identifies the Tao as being among the ants, in the weeds, in the clay tiles, and then in a pile of manure. So why did he do that? Now, and for those of you who are interested in exploring this particular stage further, who like to teach with stories, you can always look at my book, The Dow of Happiness. There, I collected what I felt was the most important Zhuangzi stories that pertains to the journey of life. The journey of life, from the beginning to the end, basically. There are many other important stories from Zhuangzi, including this one, that is not included in the Dow of Happiness. I will cover those at a later time. And I'm very happy to be talking about this story today. I'm happy because this story inspires a deeper level of thinking for all of us. Because if you think like the scholar, it seems like the Tao is nothing special if it's everywhere. It's not reserved in special places, like a beautiful building that's been erected in honor of the Tao. And it's even in places that appear to be worthless or insignificant. Now, what Zhuangzi is saying is to think in a different way, because the Tao is all the more incredible precisely because it is everywhere. Because it is not limited as to where it can be. You don't just keep it in a holy place, it's just all over. So what the scholar does, as many people do, as actually we all do, is that we divide up the world into categories and rank them against one another. That is why it seems to make sense that the Tao should be like in a temple and not on a piece of lowly, worthless ground. Not someplace that's of no significance whatsoever. It should be in a place that is set aside for special treatment. You can fix up the temple so that it's very nice and dignified. You can have rituals in there. You can conduct your holiest ceremonies of significance to the religious mind. And perhaps if you were to represent the Tao as a statue or sculpture, or painting, then you should exercise the most care to present it, maybe sculpted out of a precious material like gold, for instance. So that is the thinking of the conventional mind. Now, the thinking of the sage is totally different. And I want to lay everything out and go into this whole idea of this hierarchy and ranking order even more so than Zhuangzi has done in the story, while bringing the things that he implied but didn't talk about, as well as the things he explicitly listed, like the ants, the weed, the clay tiles, and the manure. So I want to start out with the conventional thinking, starting with the highest and holiest, and then work our way down to the mediocre level, the unremarkable level, the level of the material world, and then to the lowly, the lowliest. So in conventional thinking, what is the highest? What is the holiest? Well, if we take a look at the mentality of the scholar, basically the conventional mind thinks that deities, or perhaps deity singular, are the highest. They represent the highest aspirations of humanity. Now, of course, there are also supernatural entities other than gods, god or gods. There may be, for instance, angels. So I listed angels there just as a way to be inclusive of all the special beings that appear in various mythologies. So in Tao mythology, it would be like immortals. There are immortals, and then there are deities. Different levels of supernatural beings. Then, highest and holiest would also include depictions of them. So, a statue of a deity, a painting of a deity, or angels, these will be accorded a high level of honor as well, because they're depictions of the divine. So what else? What else is highest and holiest in the conventional mind? Well, we can look to the sky. We can look up. It's where we think the deities dwell. That is the place. The gods live in the heavens. They live up above. So we often, look up or point up when we want to signify that, we're sending our prayers up to the heaven. We're looking up to the deities above, or singular deity. So it's special because that's where the gods live, and also celestial bodies. And here I'm talking about the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets, etc., the galaxies, outer space, etc. To the ancient mind, in ancient times, the scholar would think of celestial bodies like the stars and the moon and the sun as being special, as being holy, like the gods themselves. Then what else? Well, the special places that I mentioned, reserved for the worship of the deities, those would also be the highest and the holiest. So churches, God's house, so to speak, temples, holy sites. There are holy sites all around the world that receive many pilgrims throughout the year. So we know that there are places set aside for special religious significance. So they are associated with the gods, they're associated with religious fervor, and therefore they are special. They are among the highest and the holiest. So what will be a level below the divine? A level below the sacred? Well, we just have to look around in the world to see the mundane. So we would, for instance, look among people, to look at people and see that, yeah, okay, well, we're not quite at the level of the deities, we're at a level below them. We're not highest, we're not holiest, were among the mundane. I put in treasures here because if you think about the precious items that human beings hold dear, so for instance, jewelry, gold, things that are special, works of art that have great value, these are not exactly as high as the deities themselves, unless they happen to depict the deities. If it's just a work of art, or if it's just jewelry, then it can be quite precious and valuable, but not exactly as high and holy as the deities themselves. And I put them in the same bullet points as people only because there are some people who value things more so than others, than other fellow human beings. Okay, so what would be at a level that is similar to people, but may not be quite at the level of people? Well, I will put in pets, favored animals, and I'll explain what that is in a moment. Pets, I think we all know. It's a lot of times people will think of pets as a member of the family, therefore they are close to the level of people, even though pets may not be seen as high and holy as deities. Favorite animals, I'll explain and go into great detail. For now, I'm just going to say that these are the animals that are not used as food. So for instance, you may have a plate of chicken wings, or see other people have a plate of chicken wings, but not swan wings, not the wings of the beautiful swan. And why not? Well, swans are favored. They are considered to be beautiful and graceful. They're not used for food. So swans are not quite pets, but they are favored. So there's more about that later on. So let's go a little bit further. What would be at a level below that, below what we would consider the mundane? So everything just goes further and further down. That down arrow is meant to depict the thinking of the scholar, ranking everything from the high to the low. So that's why when Zhuangzi said, well, the Dow is here, the Dow is there, he thought, well, wait a minute, you're going lower and lower and lower. So the direction in the thinking of the scholar is that it goes down. So let's talk about when it gets lower than the level of people in the conventional mind. So there's other animals that are not favored animals. There's cattle. We use them for food. So cattle, we all know what those are. The oxen, the cows, the pigs, the chickens, etc. We're very familiar with cattle. And what about the generic category animals? Well, other animals that are considered even more lowly, but they're not like cattle in that they're not used as food. So for instance, if you think about mice, rats, we don't use those as food. They're not seen as favored. A few people keep them as pets, but they are not considered to be very high up. Coyotes, think about coyotes. Animals also, not usually favored, not kept as pets. They're too wild. And then vultures, as another example, again, not used as food usually. And come to think of it, there are a lot of animals that we don't use as food. So they would all go into this category of the lowly. They are at the approximate level of cattle, and they may not even have as much value as cattle because we don't use them for food, except in rare occasions. And sometimes, people who hunt, they will get wild game and use that for food, but that's not the staple for consumers. Then we start to get into the examples used in the story by Zhuangzi. Insects, so we looked at ants, but this roughly includes other insects as well. So there's so many insects in the world. In the scholar's mind, they are even lower than the level of animals. Now, if you remember, what the scholar says was even lower than the ants was the weeds, the grass, the plants, because, well, at least the insects could move around. Everything at this level and above, animals, cattle, pets, people, etc., they all have the ability to move, but plants don't. So in his mind, the plants are at an even lower level. But when we talk about plants, though, we realize very quickly that we also see them as different divisions. So this is the working of the human mind. This is what we have to come to grips with. We, for instance, will look at flowers with special significance. Oh, we like them because they're so beautiful. Sort of like the favorite animals that are graceful and beautiful, like the swan. Fruits, well, we can use fruits, and we can use the plants that bear fruits because we can use that as food. And this would also go for crops as well, wheat, rice, etc. Those are plants too. And we like trees. Trees are cool. We get to climb around, play with them. We get to enjoy the shades under the trees. So we like them. So they are at a higher level than grass and weeds. Weeds and grass, well, wouldn't weeds be at a lower level than grass? Well, I see them as being very similar because what are weeds? It's the kind of grass we don't like. What's grass? It's the kind of weeds that we do like. So they're similar in that way, and the scholar ranks the grass, the weeds to be below insects. Now, this is, of course, not the way that Zhuangzi thinks. This is not how it looks from a Tao perspective. You can see now that the scholar's unspoken assumption is that the Tao is on the left-hand side of the slide, but not on the right-hand side. Certainly not in the insects. He was surprised by that. Not in the plants, nor the next category down in his mind, the things, the unmoving things, the clay tiles. So generic category, I put in rocks, stones, mud. These are all things that don't have the life that plants and insects have. So they're even lower. Lastly, the last category that Zhuangzi listed, waste products. So urine, manure, trash, etc. So these are the last, from insects on down, are the categories that appear in the story. Now, I want to challenge everyone. What Zhuangzi is saying is that, well, no, the Tao is not on the left-hand side of the slide. It's everywhere, and that includes the right-hand side of the slide, what the scholar considered to be lowly. I want to push even a little bit further than that, along the same lines that Zhuangzi has contemplated. So I want to challenge everyone's thinking. So I am not trying to stir up controversy. What I want to do is to get everyone to think about these topics. Your conclusions may be different from mine, but the important thing is that you exercise your mind. That is what the Tao is all about. So what I want to do is to have the right side disappear for now. Then I want to highlight some items on the left-hand side for discussion. For discussion from the Tao perspective. First of all, here's a question for everyone. It's a serious question. why is the sky more divine than the ground? How come we don't point down when we want to pray to the divine, to deities? Why do we turn our head up to the sky? Why do we look up? Why do people, when they complain about their fate, look up to the sky? Why? Why me? Okay, so they're looking up for that divine guidance. And I'm asking the question, why up and not down? So, since ancient times, I think I can make a case for the ground being very divine also from an evolutionary perspective back in the days of the early human beings. For primitive mankind, after all, the sky is the source of rain, snow, storms that lashed our remote ancestors. From the beginning of humanity, we suffered at the hands of the sky with exposure to the elements. The earth, on the other hand, is what provided protection from the beginning. The earth is what we find where early humans found caves that shielded them away from the elements, even in the most primitive times. So why wouldn't that be looked at as divine? So there's also the nighttime sky, the stars. Why should that be more divine? Now, of course, one possibility is to say that, well, there's way more out in the universe than the Earth. Now, primitive human beings did not realize that. They felt, they were pretty sure that the Earth was the center of it all. So anyhow, the perspective of the Tao is that the whole world is divine. The sky is divine, yes. So is the earth, so is the ground. The globe, the earth itself, no less divine than its atmosphere. And its atmosphere is a thin layer around the globe. That's where all the clouds, all the rain, all the storms, all the snow, that's where all of that is coming from. So the whole world is no less than divine than the thin layer of the atmosphere that produces weather. It is no less divine than the vastness of space surrounding it. I could make an argument for the Earth being more divine than other planets, planetoids, satellites, the moon, because we know the Earth is life-bearing. The Earth is Gaia, the Mother Earth. This is where the myriad things live and thrive. This is where life is possible. In outer space, hostile to humanity. You can't survive in outer space without technology and protection. Ditto the moon or Mars or Venus or any other place in our solar system can survive without protection. Why would I not regard the Earth as being more divine if it's protective of me? So I could make an argument for that. I could also make an argument from the Tao perspective that the whole universe is divine, every part of it, including our planet and other planets. So right off the bat, I want to challenge the thinking, the conventional thinking. So next time you see someone look to the sky, I would like everyone to look back to the Tao perspective and realize that, that's part of the conventional thinking. Hopefully now, looking at it from the perspective of the Tao, you realize that looking up in the sky for the divine is just one level, the basic level. Now, I want to push even a little bit there, at the risk of offending people. Let me ask this question. Why is God the man upstairs? We hear this all the time. I gotta talk to the man upstairs, meaning I gotta pray. Why upstairs? Why up? So what we're doing culturally, without meaning to, is to constrain that which cannot be constrained. We're saying God is up when God should be also down, to the left, to the right, ahead, behind, indeed, everywhere. The God that we talk about as being upstairs should not be limited to upstairs. God is in the basement. God is in the attic. God is in every room in the house, inside the house and outside the house. And why man? Why is the conventional perspective on God the sky daddy? Why should God be limited by gender? Why should God be constrained by that? So why should God have characteristics of human beings at all? So when you start to think about it in those terms, then a greater God, unlimited God, one that is not man or woman and does not resemble man or woman, one that is not human in characteristics, but unlimited by human characteristics, then you get to a concept that's actually closer to the Tao. So the Tao concept. The Tao has no gender, is not a person, and exists everywhere. Why shouldn't the concept of God be just like that? So, yeah, I would say when someone, I won't do this because it's not socially, it's not very nice socially. But if someone says, well, I gotta speak with the man upstairs, and I'm thinking, well, it's actually the woman downstairs, right? Because that's just as valid as the conventional concept of what is divine. So I think you get the direction that I'm driving at. It's similar to what Zhuangzi wanted to say. What he wanted to say was, okay, everybody, we understand what most people think. Are we limited by what most people think? No, we should go further. We should think deeper. We should think about these issues seriously and not just follow what everybody does. That is the beginning of the Tao perspective. So let me talk about people and treasures also. Just a couple of remarks here, not quite as controversial as when we talk about the man upstairs. But controversial enough because here we bring in the external qualities that people tend to judge everyone on, the external appearance. So when we talk about people, see, I put people in one category here, but in reality, it expands into a very big hierarchy of different levels, many different levels, all by itself. What do I mean by that? Well, for instance, the caste system that we know was in effect in ancient India. And let's not kid ourselves in pretending that we are more enlightened in modern times than the ancient Hindu with the caste system. Do we not also have an invisible, unspoken caste system among pretty much every society under the sun? Do we not also categorize people by ethnicity, background, origin? Indeed, we even categorize people within a particular ethnicity by external appearance. Like the beautiful people and the not so beautiful. This is what people do. This is so prevalent that it's basically taken for granted. There's also grouping by family wealth. Oh, he came from a good family. What does that mean? Well, his family's got more money than other families. The more deeply you look at this, the crazier you realize the whole scheme is judging people based on superficial external qualities, and people do this all the time. We're by no means free from this. That is why there's discrimination in the world. Happens every day. So, what is the Tao perspective? Easier said than done. The Tao perspective is the realization that there's no difference in the essence of sentient beings. That all sentient beings possess Buddha nature. All sentient beings possess the potential to awaken into a greater reality of wisdom and enlightenment, thus becoming Buddha. So in the Tao lingo, we can talk about how the Tao is the same within everyone. So we can talk about this, we can all agree on it, but the challenge is to actually feel it. The challenge is to look at people with that essential equality in mind. If it helps, think back to the Tao stories that specifically point this out. That, for instance, when you die, there's not a whole lot of difference between you and me. We're just dead. And no matter who you are, no matter how wealthy or powerful you are, you have the same 24 hours as everyone else. There is an essential equality to all humanity, no matter who you are. So what about things? As I mentioned, some people would place greater importance on material things over other people, that they're willing to kill, for instance, in order to gain material things. That tells you that they place much more value on things than life. So the Tao perspective, I think you can easily guess, is that we choose people over money, intangibles over tangibles. What do I mean by intangibles? Well, tangibles is easy. That's just material things. Intangibles are the feelings, the friendship, the connection, the relationships, all the things that are truly precious in the end, more so the material things. Again, I would say this is easier said than done. We can all agree to it. But when it comes time to actually put that into action, to prove it, there are challenges. Okay, so that's also kind of controversial because it touches upon the different grouping of people that we all engage in. But think about how it doesn't make any sense once you understand the point that Swans is trying to make, that the conventional mind, the mundane mind, is categorizing all these different things according to the higher and lower, but the Tao is in all of them. You apply that to humans, and it becomes clear. Many people categorize people at different levels and rank them as higher or lower. But in reality, the Tao will tell you that they are the same. That the Tao is present in everyone, not just everywhere. Okay, now we get to pets, favorite animals. As I mentioned, favorite animals are the ones that are exempt from being eaten, but are not usually pets. And the example that I used was swans. But there are other examples, like animals that we admire for being majestic, for as animals that we admire as circus performers, for instance, like elephants, as an example, tigers, lions. We don't use them for food. So those favorite animals avoid being eaten. In that way, they're similar to pets. And in that way, the place in the ranking is above cattle because cattle are raised as food, produce food. Now, I want to point out that there are cultural differences here. So cows are cattle here in North America, but they are sacred in India. If you are driving along a road and there's a cow right in the middle of it, you have to drive around. You can't attempt to move the cow. Other examples I think come readily to mind. Pork is not eaten by Muslims. Think about cases, edge cases like horses. Horses are favored animals in North America. Horses are usually not eaten, but horse meat is eaten in Europe. So how does that work? Are horses favored animals? One of the things that we do, that people do in general, is that we express disgust. Most people express disgust over the conventions of other cultures, like they eat what? That's disgusting. But then, of course, most people have no idea that other cultures can possibly look at our food habits and find them also disgusting, repellent, repulsive. Indeed, if you are well-traveled, you see that in different regions in North America, we have different food choices that can seem out of the ordinary elsewhere in the country. If you travel to the Midwest, you may encounter Rocky Mountain oysters, sometimes called calf fries. That's considered a delicacy in many parts of the country. It appears in food festivals. In Arizona, there are places, quite a few places, many places that serve rattlesnake as a delicacy. So the bottom line is that no one should really call out anyone else's food as disgusting. So these are all the different cases that make things confusing. We might have thought that this is easy and clear to put different animals in different categories and rank them high to low. It's not so easy. The ancient Chinese, being agricultural, agrarian society, placed great value on oxen. The oxen become like members of a family because the farmers of ancient China worked with them day in and day out. And when you do that with an animal, you cannot help but make a connection with it. So they become like pets. So I grew up in a culture where there are, people of agrarian origins who would prefer to not consume beef at all. Because, they're good. They've been helping with the farm. They're like a member of the family. Horses we talked about. Favorite animal or not? Yes, they can be majestic, but they become food in some parts of the world. Pigs, we talked about, pork not being eaten by the Muslims, but hold on one second. We don't eat dogs because dogs are pets. They're like members of the family. What about the people who keep pet pigs? Pigs are known to be even more intelligent than dogs, more affectionate. They recognize you, they're loyal, they keep you company, they love being clean. So pigs can be just as lovable, if not more so. than dogs. So we can enjoy something like a dish made from ground pork, but not ground golden retriever. How come? Why? The chickens versus the swans I talked about, but let me also note that there are also people who keep chickens as pets. So when you come right down to it, these categories blur into one another. The task of the Tao cultivator is actually quite simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. The task is to reflect on the above to establish internal clarity. That's what I have done for myself. I don't necessarily advocate any particular diet. I'm not out there as a vegetarian or vegan activist. All I really say is that as a thinking individual, you gotta use your mind and get clear for yourself. You gotta work it out and understand where you are inconsistent in your thoughts about food. Greater clarity is always beneficial no matter what. You can reach a completely different conclusion than someone else. As long as you are clear and consistent and honest with yourself, you've done your job as a Tao cultivator. Clarity in your mind will lead you to choices that are much more in accordance with the Tao. So think about this whole issue. Pets not eaten, cattle eaten, but what are animals if they are not? They all share those commonalities. You can be friends with every single one of these animals, whether they're cattle or pets, in the conventional reckoning. So what I urge everyone is to go beyond the conventional. So I want to finish by bringing it back to the story. So in the story, Zhuangzi spoke of plants, the clay tiles, and also waste products, the manure, the urine, etc. So let me focus on plants for a moment. Here's one thing to note, that human beings, the conventional thinking is that we focus on flowers. We think they're beautiful. But do flowers exist alone? There are no plants that are just flower. There are other parts of the plant, the stalk, the roots, the leaves, etc. Every part of the plant is necessary to make the flower possible. What I mean by that is that the plant requires the leaves for photosynthesis. It requires the root system burrowing deep into the ground to extract nutrients. Requires the stalk and the branches to transport the nutrients to every part of the plant. So every part of the plant is necessary to make the flower possible. Every part is valuable. Indeed, even the mud, even the ground that the roots go into, think about how the waste products provide the nutrients. That is also a necessity. That is also what the plant needs in order to flower beautifully. Therefore, Tao cultivators will see beauty in all the different parts, not just the flowers, but also the roots. And that's because this living organism, the plant, is not something that can exist just as a flower, separate from its roots. we appreciate the beauty, not just of the flower, but also recognize the goodness inherent in all the other parts of the plant. We also recognize the goodness of the soil that gives it life. So everything about this entire process has its own special beauty. Now, what Zhuangzi is pointing out, his special way of perceiving things, is still not widely understood. We may be more technically advanced than the people of ancient China, but we haven't advanced all that much in terms of our essential nature. And that is why my speculation is that this is the reason why people still don't think about the reasons behind why they do, why they point up and say the man upstairs. That's just one manifestation of human beings not really thinking about what they're doing, not really having that internal clarity. So the end of the story, this whole idea of looking at the world differently, it's a dramatic difference that the Tao can make in your life and my life. The bottom line is that people who do not understand the Tao fail to see anything special in the things that are all around them every day. They only see things as being valuable if they are represented by dollar signs. So when they have this distorted view about life, their pursuit of those values represented by dollars will never lead to happiness. That's the problem. That's why they are constantly annoyed and frustrated. So I want to suggest that as Tao cultivators, we don't need to think like that. We want to become more like Zhuangzi, that we have the ability to see the Tao everywhere. That way, you can experience this exquisite essence of our existence. So there's no need to go to a special place to search for the Tao. It's right in front of you, no matter where you happen to be looking. Every day, you are living surrounded by life, which has its own mystery and miracles. So thinking about this, I believe, will bring a smile to you, a smile that comes from the joy within, from our appreciation for the incredible beauty of it all. So that is the story. Where is the Tao? And now I think you know the answer to that question. It's absolutely everywhere. So let's move on. There are other important points to cover about this particular chapter, which is rich with meaning. So I want to make one point very quickly about the flooding water can go left or right, meaning that it has the ability, it has the flexibility to go anywhere in any direction. I want to use a graphic here to emphasize that, to talk about why this is important. Very often, I see people frustrated when they encounter obstacles. The automatic assumption is that, well, I can't proceed any further because there's something in front of me. It's blocking my way. It has to get out of my way before I can proceed. The Tao perspective is more like this picture that you see here. If your way is being blocked, then what you ought to do is to think in terms of flood water, that if you are being blocked on the right, you can go left. If you're blocked on the left, you can go right. You can go over, you can go under. And if you recognize the possibility that there's another solution, magically those possibilities open up and you see a way out. You see a way around the issue. So I want to hopefully use this image to remind everyone that when the next time you encounter something blocking your way, please automatically think about water and automatically think about how you can get around it in a very easy way. So if we have time later on today, I can talk about some examples, but for now, there's another major point that I want to make. Last time, we also went over line 5 of this chapter. 一养万物, the 4 characters, clothes and feeds myriad things. I do want to make sure everyone is aware that this particular line has variations, has a couple of different variations. Indeed, there are 2 other variations than this one. And it's all pivoting around the first 2 characters. So the variation that I use is that the Tao clothes and feeds myriad things. I want to present this to you to make sure that you are aware of the other options too. So here's another, you can tell most of the characters are the same, but the second character, P, is different. So translation is a little different from it clothes and feeds myriad things. It clothes and covers myriad things. So no longer feeding, but this is talking about the Tao being protective. So this is the other variation. What is the third variation? 爱养万物. So the first character, if you compare the third one to the first one, you see that all the characters are the same except for the first character. This character means love. And this character is the same as before. It means feeding. So this is saying that the Tao loves and feeds the myriad things. So there you go. These are the 3 major variations of this particular line. I think that when you look at this, first of all, the one that I chose is the one that encompasses the second and third variation. But when you look at all 3, there's a theme that stands out very clearly. All 3 variations are basically saying the same thing, that the Tao can be seen as the nurturing mother, the mother that nurtures all living things. So it doesn't change the point that we were trying to make, which is that the Tao has an essential nature that is life-affirming, that encourages growth. So because the Tao is within us as well, we capitalize on that. We make use of the Tao so that we can live in a better and more powerful way. So I think that makes a great deal of sense. So I wanted to make sure you are aware of that. This is line 5 we're talking about. And then right below that, line 6, there is another concept that we should cover. Let me draw your attention to it. Line 6, you can see this is translated as ever desiring nothing. And previously, we talked about how the Tao is not a human-like entity, right? Therefore, it has no human desires. It just does what it does. It doesn't want anything. That's for human beings. We have human desires. So when we emulate the Tao like that, high-level cultivators, Tao sages, will also moderate their desires. This is one aspect of it. There's another aspect that is also quite important, and that is the actions that we take should be free of desires and attachments. That we should be acting from the pure essence of the Tao. When we do that, when we act from the pure essence of the Tao, we're like the Tao. We don't have special desires for recognition. We don't have an agenda We don't have conditions, expectations. So what would be an example of that? I want to explain this concept with a story. So this story is called Saving Lives. And this story goes like this. Once upon a time in ancient China, there was an old lady who lived near a river. So for whatever reason, reasons unknown, what happened was that quite a few people every now and then would go to the river to commit suicide. It was known for that, possibly because the river itself was quite dangerous. So if you were to throw yourself into it, you could be pretty sure of ending your life. For a while, the suicides seemed to increase in frequency. That for a while, there seemed to be just a lot more people coming through, a few times every month. So the old lady became aware of this. She started to pay attention to the people who go there. Whenever she saw someone who seemed depressed, there's this interesting mixture of people who want to kill themselves. They seem depressed, but also they seem determined to put an end to it all. So the old lady learned to recognize that expression. And she would approach these people that she thought were probably going to throw themselves into the river as well. She would approach them to strike up a conversation. She would get to know them and she would try to talk them out of it. Now, the old lady was quite successful in doing this. She was able to talk quite a few people out of this plan to take their own lives by jumping into the river. So news about this quickly spread, and everyone in that area heard about her saving the lives of so many people out of compassion. Soon, the regional government heard about it too. So they sent a government official out to visit her because they wanted to reward her good deeds. They gave her official recognition for having done the good deeds, and then the government official gave her a monetary award, gave her these gold coins, very valuable. At first, the old lady said, "Oh, no, you don't need to do that. I can't take that. I'm just happy that these people I talked to have decided to continue living instead of killing themselves. That's plenty of rewards for me." But the government official was insistent. He said to the old lady, "Well, you can do even more good by accepting the reward because it sends a good message to all the people in this area. It will encourage them to also take action to save lives, as you have done. You will serve as a good example." So the old lady felt that there was some merit to these words. So she nodded, she gave in, she accepted the reward. So this was the first time that she got the reward money, but it wasn't the last time, because that particular spot that was close to where she lived, it was still a favorite of the people who wanted to commit suicide in that area. So they kept coming. Occasionally, once every few weeks, people would show up and will be determined to throw themselves into the river. The old lady would do the same thing, and again, she will be successful. Now, every time she was able to save someone in a similar situation, in a similar way, that same government official would show up, would come by with the reward money. So this went on month after month. Over time, this actually became a source of income for the old lady. More time passed. For a while, potential suicides, for whatever reason, reasons unknown, stopped coming to the river. The old lady kept looking, watching for people to come to the river with that particular expression. She saw a lot of people come and go. She wanted to spot those people who seemed ready to jump, but no one came. So after a few months of this, she was like, what the heck is going on? Her extra income was drying up. So she complained, this is so strange. Why am I not getting any business recently? All these people who want to kill themselves, they must have decided to go somewhere else. I wonder where. The end. So I hope you enjoyed that story as I did. It highlights an important teaching from the Tao. The idea is that all human beings possess a natural compassion. You do, I do, everyone does. And in the story, initially it was this natural compassion that motivated the old lady to help those who wanted to take their own lives. This compassion was pure, and therefore it was aligned with the Tao. It was, like the Tao, free of extraneous desires. The Tao is a pure, desireless state. The Tao does everything without wanting anything, so the Tao carries out its functions with no desires. This is what the old lady emulated in the beginning of the story. It's also, according to the chapter we're studying, Tao Te Ching 34, this is the definition of greatness, is to be able to act out of the purity of the Tao. So not only do Tao cultivators moderate their desires to avoid excess or avoid extremes, they also practice their virtues like helping people, assisting people, saving people, rescuing people, whatever the situation calls for. They practice doing the good things without extraneous desires or personal agendas, such as the government's going to come by and give me a reward, or I'm going to be recognized by everyone as the great guy that I am, a great gal. So those extraneous desires will take you away from the Tao and will create a situation where you are no longer walking the path of greatness. This is why I want to ask everyone to be especially mindful of this particular line that says the Tao has no desires, so that next time you feel your natural compassion to do something, to help someone, that you not second guess yourself. The first impulse to help is the purest. So act on that. Act from that, and you will be in accordance, in tune, or aligned with the Tao. So that's another important concept that I wanted to cover in this particular chapter. Okay, now I want to draw your attention to line 10. Even in the end, it does not regard itself as great. So this is talking about the Tao. This is talking about the Tao is able to create everything, but does not have any desire to take credit for that. It does not regard itself as great, even though it's the source for everything. And I added notes here that says, indeed, the Tao has no opinions about itself at all. It's not something that can have an opinion. And this is why Tao cultivators have an egoless approach in life. Now, I want to draw everyone's attention to another chapter that we have studied. This is chapter 34. There's a line in it that's similar to this one. Even in the end, it does not regard itself as great. And what I'll do, I'm gonna show you what that line looks like first, and then I'll lay them out side by side, and then I'll talk about the difference between the two lines. So this is another in-depth analysis that brings in a different chapter of the Tao Te Ching. So let's all take a look at that particular section of 63. It's from line 12 of 63, and it's translated as, therefore, sages never attempt great deeds all through life. And what happens is that there are many characters, many similarities between this line and the previous line. So this particular line is talking about sages emulating the Tao, being desireless and not regarding themselves as great. Here, it's being applied in a slightly different way. It's saying that the sages never bite off more than they can chew. They don't try to do too much at the same time. So let me put them together for you. I think it'll make it a lot clearer once you see them side by side. So look at the top half. That's the 34. That's from chapter 34 that we're studying right now. And then look at the bottom part, which is from chapter 63, which we studied before. So the translation for the line 10 and 34, even in the end, it does not regard itself as great. And then the translation for line 12, therefore, sages never attempt great deeds all through life. So let me point out that we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 characters in common between the two. So I've listed them out down here, as you can see. So then I want to make sure that we cover the difference in meaning and what happens when you emulate the Tao and you apply the Tao to life. In the context of 34, the Tao creates everything but has no need to claim credit for that creation. It does not regard itself as great, therefore, it is truly great. That's 34. That's right now. When this is applied to the prospect of living life, the Tao sages, in emulating the Tao, also do not regard themselves as great. This means they never overestimate their ability to get something done because they don't regard themselves as great. Instead, they focus on the little details, on the details of their work. It's in the small where you are great that you can create, that you can accumulate or add up to the great work that has greatness built into it in every tiny part of its composition. So they note, the Tao sages note that the way the Tao works with universal creation is that all the details are taken care of. So they do the same thing with their work, and this is how they can accomplish great things. I want to especially focus on this because this is such an important point. It gives us a clear guide to be great. So the last bullet here, we can combine the two, 34 and 63, to attain greatness and complete great works. All right, so as far as completing great works, that is in the last line of this particular chapter. The last line, and I'm going to bring those two together in just a moment. You'll see exactly how it works. For now, though, let's focus on the last line. Last line says, that is how it can achieve its greatness. So this is what it's all about. Here we are at the end of this chapter, and also at the end of our talks for this entire year. This chapter, we can see it ends on a note about achieving greatness. Therefore, as we are winding down the year 2019, that greatness is exactly what we should set our sights on in 2020. We should aspire to be great next year by having a great beginning and carry that greatness throughout the entire year. That makes this potentially one of the most important messages that I can deliver for everyone today. Here's what I want to do. I want to ask everyone who's listening right now to make a pact. This pact is for all of us, and it's for all of us to achieve greatness. Okay, so if you are willing to hear me out, here's what the pact is all about. For next year, number one, let us continue to practice the virtue of humility and never regard ourselves as great. As you have just seen, this is what Lao Tzu points out as a central characteristic of the Tao. And then in 63, it is also pointed out that this is what the Tao sages do. Let's make a pact to do the same thing. Let's never get arrogant in 2020. Let's always remain humble, remain open to the possibility of being able to improve ourselves in one aspect or another. Being able, out of humility, to accept constructive criticism, especially from people who have our best interests at heart. So that's the virtue of humility. That's number one. Number two, take note of the attention to detail that the Tao sages possess. They look at creation, they realize that the Tao takes care of all the details, they emulate that, and we should emulate them. So here's number two. No matter what we work on, let us tend to all the details and let many small achievements build up to a great achievement. So some people like to say the devil is in the details. Other people like to say God is in the details. We can say the Tao is in the details. When you take care of all the details, they add up to something that is larger than the details, that is also great, that is also taken care of as being great. So this is how to accomplish great works. It is also how to live a great life. And that's actually number three. Let us live in the Tao as below. First, by following the Tao from moment to moment, we will build a great day. A great day is composed of great moments. So by following the Tao, being mindful every moment of the day, you can guarantee that you end up with a great day. Then, by stringing together great days with one great day after another, we will build a great week. This is part of our pact. Our pact is to live great days and string them together to form great weeks. With one great week after another, the next part is that we build a great month. You know, last week was great, the week before was great, this week is great, next week is going to be great. Together, it's going to be a great month. We know 2020 will be composed of 12 months. So, with one great month after another, we will form a pact to build a great year. So I hope you would agree with me. I hope you would join me in this pact for a great 2020. And now we are ready to talk about the paraphrase. This is always the last part in our discussion of the Tao Te Ching, is to go into the paraphrase, to rephrase, to restate, express the original meaning in our own words. So this is the paraphrase, and as you recall, we have 3 sections. We have the introductory section, the contents, the middle section, and the conclusion. So I'll start with the first one. As you have heard today, the first one is about the Great Dao being like the flood. So remember the story, where is the Tao? And keep in mind the conventional notions of ranking everything from high to low, and then switch from that to the Tao perspective of seeing the Tao being present at every level. Even the levels that people assume to be the lowest, the Tao is there. So now let's go ahead and paraphrase this, the first section. The Great Tao can be compared to a flood. Flood water can flow to the left, to the right, and indeed every other direction. The Tao is similar in that it is ever present as part of everything in existence, and it cannot be stopped. It nurtures all living things continuously, and then it moves on without sticking around to take credit for what it has accomplished. So I believe that paraphrase captures pretty much every aspect of that introductory section. And now we should talk about the middle section, section 2. This is about how the Tao is the nurturing mother of all living things, and yet does not rule over them, does not desire anything, doesn't want anything. So it is quite subtle in that way and may not be easily seen by most people. So here's the paraphrase that I want to offer to everyone. Although it provides all living things with the necessities of life, the Tao does not seek domination over anything. It has no desire for praise or even recognition, and that is why it may be taken for granted. Its importance may go unnoticed. Case in point, all of us who are meeting today in the Tao meeting, we actually belong to a tiny minority of people. We're a tiny slice of the overall population that actually knows something about the Tao. Everything that we're talking about today, you may feel that it makes perfect sense. If so, that's wonderful, but let's recognize that a lot of this stuff we're talking about today is not known to the general public. Some of it they may find quite surprising, just like the scholar was taken by surprise when Zhuangzi pointed to all these different things as being with the Tao. So now let's go to the last section, the conclusion. This is about myriad things returning to the Tao, and yet it doesn't rule over them. The Tao never regards itself as great, So this manifests for the Tao sages and Tao cultivators, and hopefully you and me, especially those of you who join me in our path together, to be humble. And that is the path to greatness. So here is the paraphrase for that. Sooner or later, we, along with everything else, will return to the Tao. It is where we come from and where we ultimately belong. Despite that, the Tao claims no ownership or ruling rights. That is why the Tao is truly great. This should inspire us to attain personal greatness by emulating the Tao, being nurturing of others, and never regarding ourselves as great. So by now, I have reiterated this idea multiple times. I'm actually going to be reiterating a few more times, but you should see here all the ingredients for greatness that we can put into our own lives. Emulating the Tao, being nurturing, being helpful to other people, acting out of pure compassion. So we're now going to go into the summary, and we do have a fairly elaborate summary today, and that's because we're incorporating the blueprint that we created from last time. I think if you followed the talk last time, you'll recognize it right off the bat. So this is from our previous discussion, and I think most everyone listening probably remembers. When you aspire to the greatness of the Tao, you are 7 things, and here are the first 3. Number 1, you're unstoppable. You're like a flood water. You move forward like flood water, getting in everywhere, or like a river, naturally finding a way to the ocean. You are unstoppable. You cannot be stopped. So the image of the water flowing to the left and right of this rock, the one that I showed you a while ago, I would like to ask everyone to use that as sort of a mental anchor next time you get some sort of obstacle. As I practice the Tao in my daily life, over the years, I have heard from quite a few friends who talk about how they practice this particular Tao teaching to get more done, to get better results in their regular everyday life. One particular friend, just as an example, talked about how when he was tasked, when he was given the duty to introduce a new product to the marketplace, he had no idea what to do because at that time in the year, it was toward the very end of the year, he realized that the budgeting dollars ran dry for marketing. He had no more money to spend on advertising. So he felt that he had this impossible obstacle. It was blocking him. How can you introduce a new product? How can you advertise it without any advertising dollars? So does that mean that he would then fail or be frustrated or get angry? Actually, it did not. He remembered this particular teaching and he thought, I am unstoppable. There must be another way. There's got to be a way around this. If I'm blocked in this way, spending marketing dollars on advertising, I'll flow to another direction and get the job done. What he discovered was that, number 1, they have an intern whose major was creative writing. So he brainstormed with the intern to come up with ad copy, come up with promotional phrases and writing to describe the new product. When that was done, they both went online. They visited with different social media websites, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everything. And they posted what they had written to describe this new product that was about to be introduced. This was absolutely free. They did not spend a single cent of advertising dollars. And yet, people became interested in social media. They asked a lot of questions. They decided to follow. They ended up with 2,500 followers, so that when the new product was actually introduced, when it was brought out to the marketplace, it sold far better than their initial projections. So he came back very happy about having applied the Tao in his life. He said, I was being blocked in one direction, but I kept my mind open to the possibility that, like water, I can flow in a different direction, and I could. And I ended up getting the job done thanks to the Tao, thanks to the thinking that the Tao inspired in him. So I want to also make sure that you understand you too can be inspired to be unstoppable in 2020. Number two, when you aspire to the greatness of the Tao, you are in it for the long haul. You are not transient, you are not impermanent. So when you help other people, you are naturally compassionate in nurturing them and guiding them on their path. There is no end to your compassion. It is natural, it's a part of you. Number three, when you aspire to greatness, you are happy to let other people have the spotlight. It's the team that you manage and lead that is doing the work. So having accomplished great things, you give credit to your team, and that's because being humble, you have no need to hog the spotlight. So that's 1 to 3 on page 1. Page 2, when you aspire to the greatness of the Tao, you are not domineering. You provide nurturing guidance to help other people, but there are no strings attached. You have no need to control anyone. So this is just a reminder of what we have gone through last time. Number 5, when you aspire to the greatness of the Tao, you are often taking actions in seamless ways. That is because you have no need to attract attention, draw attention to yourself, and you don't need payback. So acting in accordance with the Tao makes it naturally seamless. Some people may not realize it, but the powerful work that you conduct has been done. Number 6, when you aspire to the greatness of the Tao, you are often attracting good things and people into your life. So this is what I want to wish for everyone, because like attracts like. So the goodness you create in 2020 will also attract goodness to you. And that manifests as good things happening and good people coming into your life. That is my wish for you in 2020. And lastly, this cannot be emphasized enough, to be truly humble, to claim no credit, to not regard yourself as great, and therefore become truly great. So that's a summary restated from last time, and I think it makes more sense after you have heard the stories related to this chapter today. Next, and this is right before the summary for our talk today, daily application. We've just gone through the blueprint for greatness, and now that you see the meaning of greatness in the Tao, I would like you to put your understanding to good use. Specifically, I want to ask you in the next few weeks to look around in your life and notice the people who already exhibit signs of greatness. There are already people like that. We're all at various points in our journey in life. Some people can be great in one particular aspect, and those are the people we can learn from. What I want to encourage you to do is to look for people like that, connect with them, get to know them, and take a look at the blueprint, see how many points in the blueprint match what they do in daily life. When you do this, you cannot help but take on the attributes of greatness within yourself. This particular chapter tells us that greatness is natural. It's a birthright in the Tao. And that greatness that you sense in other people, that you learn, can rub off on you so that you become great too. So this is the way that I want to suggest to everyone to cultivate greatness in yourself. Lastly, we finally work our way to the summary for our talk today. So we actually went over several important concepts. The first one is the image of the ant that you saw. The story was the Dow. Where is the Dow? So the first summary point to present is the answer to that question, and that is the Dow is ever present. The Dow is here, there, everywhere. So a couple of reminders for you from the discussion that we had following the story. First one, conventional thinking puts everything in ranking order, leading to discrimination and distortions. And that takes you away from the Tao. So bullet number 2, I want to suggest to you that it is time to take another look at our own thoughts. This is the challenge, guys. Do we also have ranking order on other people based on external appearance? Maybe based on skin color in some cases. So if that is the case, watch for that. Watch for that in yourself and in other people. Recognize the underlying equality in the essence of the Tao that is present in everyone. So that's number 1. So let's go on to number 2. The Tao is nurturing. So I showed you the variations of line 5, and and we went over the translation for those lines. So you can tell that no matter how you render that line, no matter which variation you go with, they are all valid in the sense that they all come from different editions of the Tao Te Ching that have been passed down through the generations. It's probably the one area in the Tao Te Ching that has the most variations, and they come from all the different editions historically that's been handed down. But they all say similar things. They all say that the Tao is the nurturing mother, which is another way to say that the Tao is life-affirming and supporting of everything we do. It gives us everything we need. It gives us every chance to succeed. So when you go forth onto the path of greatness in 2020, remember that the Tao is your ally, that you can use the Tao to propel yourself on the road of greatness. That's number 2. Number 3, the Tao is desireless. So this is where we talk about the Tao being a pure state, free from extraneous desires. So the idea here is that we want to emulate the Tao and act from our best, most natural, and most pure nature. And this means compassion, this means virtues, this means being conscientious and following your conscience. And when you do that without desires for external approval, validation, recognition, you are well on your way to greatness. So that brings me to the very last point from today. Please remember our pact for greatness in 2020. I'm going to hold up my end of it, and I hope you will also commit to holding up to your end of it for 2020. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.